welcome everybody to the One Podcast. I'm your host, David Medina, and I'm excited for today's conversation. Today, I have a special friend who I've been, I've known her for a few years, but also incredibly curious about her in this specific context, in the context of the conversation we're going to have today about creativity. She is a musician, a poet, a writer, a painter, a wellness practitioner. Yeah, she just does a lot of things that I'm very impressed by and inspired by often. And her name is Taran Ailey. Welcome to the One Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat about all things creativity today.
Yes. So as I said, I've been so curious about you. I've known you for a few years now, and obviously we've hung out, and I know things about you. And I've been inside of experiences that you've created as well. And it's always, I don't know if you remember this, but I've told you a number of years back that you remind me of the energy of David Bowie.
I don't think I remember that, but that's a really great compliment. I really love that.
Yeah, because, David Bowie was just, he created everything. Anything you can possibly imagine, he did. And you remind me of that. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how the world of kind of creativity took hold of your consciousness?
Yeah, it's definitely still, a long story and kind of still evolving, but I suppose the gist of it is I grew up in a really musical family, so I think I was exposed to that form of artistry early on, and that was kind of the first art form that I took to was probably singing and then learning some instruments. I got into music theater really young, so a lot of dancing and singing and acting kind of was I guess my first artistic loves. And then I always had an affinity towards fine art. So I took a lot of like drawing classes and photography and that kind of stuff in high school. And then, yeah, I think it was always kind of just a passion and a hobby. And then when I went to college, my original degree was in art therapy. So I really wanted to do something to help people and then specifically more in art. So I took a lot of art classes. I always joke that I started off like my first semester of college just taking one art class, and then by the end I had just dropped all of my like generals and was just taking art classes because I was like, oh, this is way more fun than math and science and English. So yeah, I always had an affinity towards the fine arts from a young age. Kind of around that same time I started getting into the wellness space and went to school for massage therapy and yoga, which led me into sound healing. And then I think it's just been a continual evolution of just following desires that I have to learn. I really love learning and exploring. And I can kind of look back now and see that like a lot of it is like a product of ADHD, which I would have thought that maybe I would have understood sooner on, but I think I spent a lot of years kind of, finding something, really obsessing over it, studying it, taking all the classes I could, starting a business even, being like, okay, I'm going to do this forever. And then either losing interest or finding something else that I was like, oh no, this is the thing. Like I'm obsessed with it. And so I think a lot of creatives do, are tend to be more neurodivergent in that way of maybe like brain capacity works in a little bit of a different way. But yeah, that's basically kind of the more general summary of my story. And in the last, 10, 15 years, I've definitely just hyperfixated it on a lot of different things and just really, really enjoy pouring my creative energy into different things, learning about different things. I think I've gotten really good at being a beginner, which has kind of allowed me to have less resistance when it's like, okay, I want to learn how to do silversmithing or ceramics or play the cello or play the harp. I've been in these spaces so many times where I'm like, okay, I'm okay with being bad at something for a while or uncomfortable. And just knowing like if you pick something and you stick to it, you'll kind of, eventually create some progress around it. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the general, how I got into all the things and all the things that I, continue to learn and so much of it for me is like in the wellness space and in the healing arts space, but also, yeah, in the fine arts space and the creative worlds. I think it's definitely my biggest love and passion.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. Like when you point out sort of the ADHD portion of this, I'm wondering, like you said, you pick something up, you're doing it, and then all of a sudden you pivot and want to do something else. I know for me, I'm always wondering, or I did in the past, what's wrong with me, right? That I can't stick to one thing. Is that something that was presented to you early on?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think I had, it's still something I have some insecurities around, but I have a very different relationship to it now. But for many, many years, it was like the biggest source of insecurity for me that I just could not stick to one thing and that I would find something and get obsessed and be like, no, this is it. Like, this is the thing. I would like start a whole business around it or be like, this is my new identity. And then just lose interest. And that happened so many times where I definitely felt really, really frustrated with myself and like, oh, why can't I stick to anything? Why can't I, find a thing that works for me? A lot of insecurity when people ask me like, what do you do for a living? And I say like, oh, I do 10 different things. I'm a writer and I'm a musician and I teach classes and I yada yada yada, whatever it is at the time. Yeah, definitely a huge source of insecurity in the past, but I really have a different viewpoint and perspective now because I really understand it more as a superpower, and it's way more interesting. Like life is so much more interesting when you can have a lot of things, and it's really like a very capitalistic mindset to be like you can only have one career, you can only focus on one thing, and you have to maximize that. You have to invest decades into that one thing and create this, whatever the level of success is. But I definitely understand it a lot different now and kind of appreciate it as just an alternative way of being.
Yeah, the capitalistic sense of it is like you stick to one thing and then you have to climb that ladder, right? Like
Yeah, and
max.
monetize it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just get to the highest point possible. And it's like, this is not the 1950s. It's not our parents' generation or grandparents' generation where you're working somewhere for 50 years. It's a totally different time.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because to me, it's been a source of insecurity as well. Like I couldn't stick to one thing, can't complete things. And
Yeah.
I'm in the process now of excavating all these old projects that I've had for many, many years, poetry and short stories. And I'm in the middle of editing my short story collection now. So it's been an interesting, like you said, it's a superpower for me.
Yeah.
It actually makes it life way more interesting, and I have a lot more ways to express different things. So yeah, so that's really, really, really powerful. Can you tell me when was the first moment you felt this energy of creativity? Can you go back to that moment?
That's such a good question. I think for me, I'm really grateful that that was fostered really young in me. I think I have a memory of being pretty young, like 3 or 4, and like drawing a picture. And my parents, I'm sure they would have, if I drew like a squiggle, they would have had the same reaction. But I remember, I think it was my grandparents. I was at their house and I just remember the reaction being so positive of like, oh my gosh, like you're a genius, and I'm sure it was just like a little scribble flower, but I have such a distinct memory of that feeling of being like, oh, I can draw, like I can make something. And even with like music, singing at a young age and just having like a lot of positive feedback or being in a household that was really nurturing of that, being put in like voice lessons or piano lessons, I think my creativity and my like artistic expression really showed up very young for me.
Yeah.
And I think that is a reflection of my family, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah. I remember you telling me a story about getting in trouble for painting your walls.
Oh yeah, that's a okay, yes, this is a good story. So I did grow up, my family was very encouraging of like, be in choir and take music lessons. But there were definitely some other aspects of it that were a little bit more conservative. And one of yeah, my parents were like really anti like painting your walls or putting holes in your walls or putting sticky stuff in your walls. Like grew up very particular about that. And so this story is actually in relationship to the tattoo that I have, which is a vine kind of up my arm and shoulder. And the reason that I got that tattoo is because of this story. And it was so I think I must have been like in high school, 16 or 17. And I just decided to go to Home Depot and get a can of green paint. And I stayed up all night and I painted the whole inside of my room with vines, with green vines. And I painted them on the door frame and up onto the ceiling. And I remember being so like I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this, but it was kind of my first act of like rebellion. It was the first, and I think being a creative, being an artist is to be rebellious. Like it's a form of activism to create art, to do things in spite of what's normal or what's normalized, to be abstract, to do things against the norm. Like it really is a form of activism. So I think in that moment, that was the first time. And I grew up really conservative, like I grew up Mormon, like a very kind of rigid, structured household. And so for me to be like, I'm going to do this act, which is so funny now. I'm like, I painted vines and that was my big act of rebellion. I'm sure some other people, probably even including you, could give me a run for my money on rebellious acts. But yeah, that was my first kind of big act of rebellion. And I did get in a lot of trouble. My dad was so mad. He was like, you broke the walls of the ceiling. And he ended up letting me keep it. I think I eventually had to paint over it when I moved out. But yeah, it was definitely a kind of a fond memory of just that urge to create or that urge to paint or do something different and being like, I'm just going to do this no matter what the consequences.
Did you at all sort of internalize getting in trouble for that? Like, was there, because it kind of connects to like, and I'm not saying your parents did this, but sometimes creativity gets extinguished because of certain rules or things that people believe in. Did you feel that in that moment at all, or was it something that was you got in trouble, but at the same time it's just like, hey, this is what I do?
Yeah, I really wish that I had more, and I, trust the evolution of my journey, but I do wish I had more of that, like standing up for who I was when I was younger. I think that didn't come until much, much later. But I definitely internalized that and just a lot of not only like familial upbringing, but social, influences. And I think for me, making art, you just have to go up against all of your fears and insecurities and doing things differently constantly. Like I definitely have come a long way in that space where I have more confidence in my expression. But I still face crippling self-doubt and fear of judgment or fear of people not understanding or fear of, and it's not so much like I'm going to get in trouble, but it's that people aren't going to understand me or they're not going to like my art. Like there's still that need for external validation that shows up sometimes. But I definitely am in a much better place now where I've learned to, self-source that validation. And even though there's the fear there, do it anyway.
Yeah. How did you get there? How did you get to the place now?
I think just so many repetitions of forcing myself to do things that are uncomfortable. When I was writing my poetry book, it was almost every day I would go through this internal battle of like, this is one moment I'd be like, I'm a literary genius. And then the next moment I would be like, this is the worst poetry that anyone's ever seen in the history of all time. And then kept coming back to, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, because making art is not about if it's good or bad. It's not about if I'm going to sell a million copies or one copy. It's just about creating for the sake of creating. And I think after so many repetitions, it's gotten a little bit easier, but I still face that, I still face that a lot, but it has been years of, even with my music, like writing and recording music, going through like, what if this is really bad? Like, what if this music's bad and everyone hates it? And then being like, okay, what if they did? Like, what if they did hate it? I'm still going to make it because it's for me and I love it. And yeah, I think shifting the narrative and the dialogue around what do people think or will people like it to, okay, this is just for me. And if people like it, awesome. And if they don't, awesome. And I'm creating art because it brings me intense amounts of joy. It's incredibly healing and therapeutic. And it's what my calling is. It's what making art is a spiritual practice for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So like Rick Rubin says, I don't make art for everybody. I make it for me. Let it do what it's going to do. Like the other side of that is just commerce. He's like, I'm not doing commerce. I'm doing art. And that's all for me. So yeah. And I face similar things inside of, will people hate it? Will people like it? Will people judge it? I've sort of come to this place of like courage around my art, and so I'm releasing a poetry book soon.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm so excited for you.
yeah, and then
It's
everybody,
scary.
yeah, it
It's
is,
so scary to put your art out. It's terrifying.
yeah, yeah, and I'm editing these short stories that I've had for over 20 years. It's just sitting there.
Wow.
It's written in the form of young adult, so it's going to be a young adult book. But
Okay.
as I'm editing it, I'm going through it. I'm going through it, and I'm like, yeah, this is exciting. This is great. And then all of a sudden, I hit this wall of like, fuck, this sucks. You
Yeah.
know, like who writes like this? Like, why did I like? Just all these judgments start to come up, which screeches everything to a halt. So it's powerful to just, like you said, do repetitions and just keep in it, and regardless of what it may look like, that's the thing. Like I know I have the power, right, to make it better or change it or do whatever I want with it. It's not like set in stone. And
Yeah,
what
I think we
does
have to like really develop a relationship with those voices. And sometimes too, it's just making space for them. Like, okay, what part of me needs to feel like what part of me feels fear and needs some validation? And how can I self-source that and give that to myself? Or, okay, what part of me is just feeling like a little vulnerable? Because it's super vulnerable to share the guts of your heart with other people. And so sometimes we just need a little tending to or a little care. But yeah, I think there's, I came to the conclusion that I just needed to delusionally believe in myself above all else and have spent many years waiting for other people to believe in me, whether it's my parents or partners or friends, really, really being waiting for them to tell me you are the most amazing artist in the world, or your painting is incredible, or your poetry is incredible, or your music. And where there may be some external validation from those spaces, I definitely came to the conclusion, especially at the beginning of last year when I was like, okay, I'm going to do my book, I'm going to do my album. I realized where I was still waiting for someone else to believe in me or invest in me, and then realizing, okay, I actually have to radically, delusionally, obsessively believe in myself, or there's no other way that this art is going to get out.
That's very, very true. I find you to be someone who is super creative. I mean, I'm always sort of inspired and in awe of the things that you create, and not just, the things that you put out in the world, but because I'm your friend and I've been to your home and like seen just these little things that you do, and in every aspect of your life, your fashion and just everything that you do is super inspiring and just fun to watch. And one of the things I've had the absolute pleasure of like being a part of your events. In particular, I think the first one with Rogue Reverie with Zoe.
Hey, Joey.
Hi, Zoe. And I mean, for those who aren't around, the experience of Rogue Reverie was incredibly impactful for me the first time when I witnessed it. I just couldn't wrap my head around what was happening in the room. Seriously.
Amazing.
It was like two human beings who created this incredible experience with instruments and their voices. And for me, it was like the essence of creativity, like live and in person. And
Hmm.
there was a healing aspect to it, right? And I think, and that was definitely your intention. So, can you make the connection of creativity with the power to support people in healing?
That's a really good question. Well, I think that when we offer our gifts, it's incredibly healing because we're offering the truth of who we are. I also believe that when we express our art, it gives people permission. to do that as well. And I think that, so, Rogue Reverie is more of a sound healing experience. It's more of a meditation experience, but the intention really is through us expressing our art and our love for music, it invites healing for other people. So I think a lot of it has to do with intention, really intentionally creating a space for people to reflect and heal. But I think that good art inspires art. And I think that even if it's a sound healing or a crazy musical or a really avant-garde fashion show or painting, all of those things still elicit healing because we connect to it. When people share their heart, their art, it makes us connect to it and feel less alone in our humanity. I think that art is really like just the focal point of someone's essence in a lot of ways and their vulnerability and authenticity. And when we get to really experience that and receive that, we feel witnessed in our own version of that. And then also inspired, good art inspires good art. And so art doesn't have to necessarily be, drawing or painting, but it's artistry. And yeah, it brings us into a greater sense of connection with not only each other, but with ourselves.
That's so true because the very act of just being human is being an artist. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, everyone is an artist. The fact that only some people are an artist is the biggest scam to ever have been made because we're creators. We create life, we create life, we create our own lives as we have been created. We are creators. And so much of us, so much of westernized belief system is rooted in the fact that we are helpless to the unfolding. And there is an aspect of surrender and we don't have a lot of control, but we do get to be intentional creators of our own life. And if we want to create our life intentionally, why not start with the things we can create in? Why not be more intentionally and expressive creators in the way that we make food or grow food or dress our bodies or have conversations or fill spaces with sound and music and color and all of those things. There are infinite ways to be an artist, and it is my belief that every single human being is an artist because they are a creator.
Absolutely. Yeah, 1000%. I agree with that. Yeah, it is such a scam to tell people.
It's a scam.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is such a
it keeps us
scam.
it keeps us disempowered, to believe that being creative is something other than us.
Right. And what's funny is like we live in a society that has that message, but yet you look around, everything around you was created. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
somebody created all these things around us anyway. So like, yeah, so
yeah. We're constantly creating.
exactly, exactly. So what's your process with dealing with doubt and fear when it comes to creating?
I really learned to make space for it. I think I, for many, many years, forced it out of my brain. And then there is an underlying wave of shame, I think, that can show up when you're like, oh, you're fighting with it or you're arguing with it, or you feel shameful that you feel that. And when I feel it, I just let myself, I just make space for it, like, okay, let's be doubtful, let's be fearful. Like, can I just feel what is the absolute worst case scenario? And then it's still okay. Instead of, for example, I might say, like, everyone hates your artwork. And how I used to deal with that is by saying, that's not true. That's not true. Your artwork's good. That's not true. Which I think is, can be effective too. And now the dialogue looks more like, what if everyone hates your artwork? And what if that's true? And if it was true that every single person in the entire world hated your artwork, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. You're still going to be okay. You're still going to make art. You're
Mhm.
still going to be worthy and deserving of love. So I think, yeah, just making space for the fear and doubt and having a relationship to it. And then the part two of that is then, re strengthening the positive beliefs, like making space for the fear and doubt, having dialogue around it of like what's showing up or what do I need, and then choosing to be brave. Like it's so brave to say, okay, I'm going to do this anyway. And also, I believe in myself. Coming back to that internal validation, we learn from a very young age to look outside for validation, even, just with the picture story when we're a kid, we draw a picture and the first thing we do is we show our parents and then they say, well, that's really good. We're looking for, or maybe not, or maybe they say that's really bad because there's, parents out there that are probably not the
Again.
nicest. Yeah. Or, a lot of people I work with creative expression and like, especially vocal expression have a lot of traumatizing stories around elementary school or junior high where they wanted to be a singer or they sang for the first time and they had a teacher tell them you have a bad voice or you shouldn't sing. So then early on we learned to create because of the external validation. So we learned to look for that. And if we can learn to start self-sourcing that, and this is, frees us up in all aspects of life. But when I really want someone to tell me that my music is good or that my writing is good, how can I self-source that? How can I look towards myself and tell myself, okay, when that fear shows up, when that doubt shows up, like you are, like, I love your artwork. Like, I love your writing. I love your music. This makes me happy. This brings me joy. And yeah, deciding to just be brave and courageous anyway in the face of doubt and fear. How about you? Do you have a tool or technique that you use when that shows up?
Yeah, I mean it's similar in the sense of like making space for it and having for me I have a conversation with it and see where is this coming from. And typically it's incredibly old, old fear.
Uh,
It's nothing new ever. So yeah, so my process is the same. It's like giving it space, having a conversation with it, and just exploring like where it comes from. And also understanding, is this true? And most times it's not. you know?
yeah.
So for me, that's kind of how I deal with it. And then I also remind myself that there are people who are not going to like my stuff,
Also that. Yep.
right? That's just going to happen in any aspect of anything that you create or do. There will be people who may not like it. And I think in my head, it's like the worst case scenario in the sense of like, they will come to my house, knock on my door, be like, yo, this sucks, bro. Like, take this back. Like, why do but it's never that. It's usually,
Yeah.
silence. People just don't give you feedback, which is fine.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, it's really, and it's also, there's a internal, like you were saying, there's a self-validation in which I just tell the little kid inside me, this is what I was meant to create. This is what you wanted to create when you were 12, when you were 14. You wrote all these things. You've been writing since you were 8.
Mhm.
So there is a purpose for this, which has nothing to do with the outside world. This is totally completing something for myself
Yeah.
in a powerful way, and the external outcome just doesn't matter.
Yeah. It can't. The expectation, it's really difficult not to have expectation. And I've definitely sat in a lot of layers of that, even this last year of releasing the pressure we put on our art, right? We put so much pressure on it to sell a certain amount of copies or go on tour or whatever it is. And, we're human and so we have desires and desires are okay. But learning to release that, I even realized, I recorded my album this year and my book and I put so much pressure on it. I'm like, okay, I have to post every day and I have to share a poem every day and like share a song every day and play this amount of shows and go to this amount of open mics and then realized, no, I don't. Like I can do it if I want to. It feels good to share organically, but my music and my art and my writing doesn't have to be a certain level of success in order for it to be valid.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to do it because it feels good to make art, and that's enough.
Yes. Ooh, yes. It really is enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So, talking about your projects, you actually released two records last year. One was the first,
Mhm.
the EP, Letting Go, and then For Her, which was the full length record. Was
Yes.
there, I was curious, which by the way, if anybody's not listened to it, please go listen to it. Spotify, all the platforms, check it out. It's absolutely
Thank you. Having the plug.
stunning, and stunning and beautiful. But was there a connection between the two records as far as allowing yourself to let go of the emotions related to the first record so that the second record could emerge? Like, was there any connection between the two?
Yeah, in some ways. I've been writing music for a decade and a half, and I just never recorded it. And it was that, kind of similar how you were saying with your writing, you just keep putting it off and you keep saying like one day or when I have time or when I have money or when blah blah blah. And it was kind of like killing me. It
Mm,
was eating me up to have gone so long. And most of this music I wrote over a decade ago to have not recorded it. And I went through a really big life change, as you know, at the end of 2023, where I ended a big relationship and I, kind of closed a really long career. And I was face to face with all this space. And in it, I was like, okay, it would be the biggest betrayal to self to not do this right now, where I have some money set aside, I have some time, I'm in all this big raw emotion from my breakup and moving and all these things. So that was kind of the Kickstarter catalyst. And then I was so fresh in, the breakup from this like 6 year relationship. I was so fresh in that emotion that that felt like what I wanted to record first. And so I wrote a lot of songs kind of in the relationship to the end of the relationship and after, it was a 5 song EP.
mhm,
And that felt really important to do at that moment because I was in it. And recording that and releasing it was so therapeutic and so healing to pour because it's so much, a lot of us at this point in our life have gone through a breakup or two and they're brutal. They're brutal and can be very displacing and disorienting. So having something to pour all of that into felt like I needed to do that first
yeah.
because I was in it. And then once I completed that EP, I was like, okay, I'm going to get all the songs from my early 20s, which was about 14 songs. I had more, but I picked 14 of the ones I really wanted to record. And then it was this process of really honoring and believing. So the album is called For Her because it's for the early 20s version of me that didn't believe in her music enough
Mm,
to record it and to give it the time that it deserved. So the second album was very much pouring into just me believing in myself, and reclaiming myself as a musician and finishing these songs and then coming from that, yeah, I've got 3 other albums I'm working on. And now I have a more kind of jazzy, upbeat EP that's finished that's going to come out, and then like a 10 song, kind of more fun, upbeat album, and then a sound healing album. So each project definitely has, a story and emotion and is kind of played off of it, but it is definitely a deeper representation of where I'm at in life and just part of my story overall.
yeah, beautiful. Can't wait for those. What kind of healing did this particular combination of those two records bring to you in your life?
So much. It has been so incredibly healing to pour, almost an entire year, like 2 days, 2 full days a week, like every Tuesdays and Thursdays, in the studio, just pouring into this music. For sure, the first EP, just, yeah, giving it a space, a voice to all of the big emotions that I had. And then the second album, just radically choosing myself for
Mm,
the first time in my whole life. Like I really have poured into community and into my clients, into family and partnership, and really, really pouring into other things besides myself, and to really just live and breathe my art for a year and pour into that was the most like radical form of choosing self that I could have done, I think. And in that process, just so incredibly healing and self-actualizing and nourishing, like really, really deeply nourishing. And in some ways, like all of these messages from the music that I had written in my early 20s was like applicable to what I was struggling with this last year of like going through so much big change. And it was this really cool timeline, like mirror in some way, where like as my older self, I was tending to my younger self by recording all this music. And my younger self was tending to my older self with all of this, like these messages and these meanings of like hope and belief and overcoming hard things. And just, yeah, it's been a really beautiful experience.
In the EP Letting Go, there was a song called Got Lost.
Mm,
You say, hopefully I got this right, was you say there was always you and there was never me. That resonated deeply for me. In past relationships, I find myself getting lost, and mostly it was because I didn't know how to express my authenticity. And,
yeah.
and that came from sort of the fear of being abandoned. So I was really kept it safe. I was a chameleon, essentially.
Yeah.
What was it for you, specifically in that song and in that lyric?
Yeah, yeah, basically that of just always choosing someone else over myself and feeling that for this whole big relationship, like I was always choosing him, that person, and I wasn't choosing myself. And it was no one's fault but my own. Like I take, total ownership of that and the patterns that I recreated and, from childhood and, the overpouring into other people and the hopes to, have that in return. But that's kind of where that lyric stems from is, yeah, just being like, it was always you, it was never me, that I always was choosing someone else instead of myself. And yeah, getting lost in it, like just all of a sudden you have such a clear version of yourself or view of yourself at one point, and then years go by, and all of a sudden you don't recognize yourself. Parts of yourself. You don't recognize parts of yourself, and feeling, yeah, really lost. Like I just kind of lost myself, and in years of, yeah, doing what I thought I should do, doing what I thought was noble or what looked good on the outside or what checked the boxes of, home, partner, family, pets, career, and realizing underneath that all, I was not choosing myself in the way that I wanted to.
Totally relate to that, for real.
Yeah. Do you
Uh,
feel like you've learned how to, choose yourself more authentically in partnership now?
oh God, yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of that came from taking time for myself, really exploring my emotions and really exploring authentically who I am and understanding that who I am is absolutely perfect and who I
Mm,
am is a superpower. And I didn't have to act for anybody. I didn't have to pretend to be something else. For me, when I came home to that, I settled into myself and I was really okay with not being in a relationship or being with anyone. I was very, very, and still am, very comfortable with myself and
yeah, that's
accept
huge.
myself fully. And, I think that's important in partnerships. Once you do that, I think the person you're with will accept you fully. And also, once you come home to yourself in that way, if you're in partnership with someone who's not accepting you, you know that right away. And
Yes, absolutely.
you could eject immediately.
Yeah, yeah, your like tolerance for misalignment goes, down so much.
Totally. That's been a powerful thing for me. So the second record for her, you mentioned it was about honoring the person you were in your 20s, the person who wrote those songs in your 20s, and honoring that. What finally cracked open for you to go, I'm going to step into this and do this?
I mean, it really was just coming out of this like really big year of, or this big cataclysmic life transition. I
Yeah.
think I ended a really long relationship. I moved out of a home that I lived in for 5 years. I closed my massage practice of 12 years. I stepped away from Rogue Reverie, which was a business project I had with my best friend. That was 6 years. And it all just came, it was just this moment of truth where I just had to start letting go and a lot of it was just intuitive. It was like, okay, it's time to let these things go. And there was so much resistance. It was a really painful chapter. And then I kind of just got rid of a lot of the things I owned, put some stuff into storage. I ended up moving in with my mom. And then just being like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do next? And then knowing in that moment that I had to record my music. Like it just felt like it wasn't an option. I had this kind of chapter in space. And I ended up meeting, like right around that time, I met my producer, Ruthie, who was kind of just also getting into recording. And so she was looking for, people that looking for some projects, and she's kind of learning as well. We ended up just being like an amazing fit. And I really feel like the universe kind of brought us together in so many ways. I'm so grateful for her. And yeah, it just all lined up. And there was definitely a moment of, okay, like are you going to choose yourself? Like you gave up everything to choose yourself. Like, are you actually going to choose yourself in this moment? And for me, that looked like choosing my music, being like, okay, I'm going to put my resources and time and energy into this music because I would be betraying myself if I didn't do that, because the call had been there for so long and I'd been ignoring it for so long. And there was just no way that I could
Yeah,
say no to it.
turn your back on that falling. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like clearing space, right? All those things
Oh,
add
yeah.
open up a lot of
Yeah.
space for you to choose.
So much space. I cleaned house. I called it my like burning everything to the ground moment, because it was, yeah, 6 months of just burning everything to the ground. And once you let go of one thing that doesn't fit and you get really honest with yourself and you start listening to that inner voice that's been there the whole while, like once you open that door, you can't close it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
Like you have to just get really honest with yourself all across the board.
yeah. Because that door doesn't close once it's open. It really doesn't.
Mhm.
You may
Yeah.
think it does, or
You
you
can
may
you can try, but
try, but yeah, it's once it's open, it's open. You released also a wonderful book of poetry,
ah, I see it.
From the Inside of Corners. I couldn't put it down. Uh,
Oh,
it was very rich with vulnerability and authenticity, and I really felt like I knew you even better from reading it. Wrinkles is a favorite of mine, where you
oh,
think about, I guess, the wisdom there is with age and how we're constantly given the message to not age, to stay young, how we're constantly given that message. And really, what that's about is not wanting to talk about, for me anyway, not wanting to talk about mortality in a lot of ways. Do you feel creativity gets better with age as long as you don't sort of allow outside influence to infiltrate your imagination?
yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I haven't really thought of it in that particular context, but I think every skill we have gets better with time. The more we can pour into something, the better we get at it. That's, think about learning an instrument. If you picked up a guitar now, it's inevitable to get better by the time. If you were to continue pouring into it, in a year you would be a good guitar player. In 10 years, you would probably be like incredible. And then imagine if you were playing for 30 or 40 years, how fine-tuned your skills would be. I really believe that for creativity. Just like anything, the more time and repetitions and, opening of that channel and getting out of our own way we pour into it, it could only get better with time. And imagine if we valued that more than our external like vessel. I do think our resistance to aging is definitely our fear of dying and our massive resistance to our own mortality. And if we could see all the other things that just continue to grow and deepen and richen with age, if we could focus on those things, imagine if our society prioritized, artistry, and we were just selling art classes and art supplies versus, lip filler and makeup. That'd be incredible.
I think the more comfortable you get with death, the more you live.
100%.
Yeah.
I Yeah,
Well,
100%. Yeah, I think if no one's ever experienced a close death in their life, part of me is, doesn't want people to suffer, but I really think there's so much value in experiencing that kind of grief and loss and being with our own mortality and death regularly, because it does make you incredibly present to people and to life, because we don't know how much time we have. That's the other thing about creativity that helps me get through is whenever I'm afraid to share a poem or a song or a piece of art, I just imagine my body like rotting in the ground. Even in 100 years, like I just imagine me being no one I know being alive at some point and being like, am I gonna let that's the thing that's gonna stop me from making art is like what people think is thought currency. You
Mhm.
know, all of these people are not going to exist at some point or another, and I'm not going to exist at some point or another. And why wouldn't I use this precious time to do the things I want to do?
I think of it as like a creative legacy.
Yeah.
There is something about leaving something behind, no matter what it is.
Yeah, our art is probably the only thing that will really outlast us, what we create.
Another one was baptized.
Mm.
I would do my baptism over again and show up in a colorful mess instead of a pristine white dress. That's like crystallizing creativity.
Mm.
I would
Yeah.
show up as my creative self and not in this
Yeah.
pristine thing.
Like I don't need to be washed clean of sins. Like I'm gonna wear my imperfections on my body. Yeah.
Could you talk more about that? The imperfections of that?
Yeah, I mean, that piece is really, I mean, I grew up Mormon and I was baptized at 8. So that piece is really just a reclamation of the concept of imperfections and sin and, me being like, I'm not going to subscribe to that. And in fact, I'm going to celebrate these parts of myself. And I think that the more like macro version of authenticity is why it's so powerful, is because our sins, our imperfections are the things we are most afraid to show other people or that we've, gathered shame around. But those are the things that make us human. And those are the things that make other people relate to us and feel connected to us, right? It's our humanity. It's our humanity and the weird things we think and the absurd thoughts and our off-cuff senses of humor or the peculiar way that we might, for me, like with writing, I have a little bit of a peculiar style maybe of writing and the metaphors that I use. And so that for a long time, I was like, oh, is this too weird? Like, am I too weird in the way that I write? And then realizing, no, it's just me, it's just who I am. It's just my quirks. And it gives other people permission to be quirky and
Yeah.
for us to feel less alone and to stop making everything homogenous and clean. Like we need diversity. Diversity is what creates so much richness. If you even biologically, like, in the soil, we need diversity in the way we think and the way we make art and the way we connect and the people we surround ourselves with. And
Yeah.
really, the more we can create that, I think the more free we can all be to be our weird little selves.
And there's always a sense of, at least for me, sometimes there's a sense of imperfection and creativity where
Yeah.
try to be as perfect as possible, placing things exactly the way I think would be perfect instead of just allowing it to just be what it is.
Yes, that's big. The pressure we put on ourselves to for it to A be perfect and B to be finished in order to share it. I know that's a hard one for me. It's like how many things I haven't shared because it's not finished yet or not perfect yet. But that's part of it too, is being like, okay, this is what it is, and put it out there.
Exactly. What would you share with people out there regarding creativity? Like any sort of, if anybody's struggling with it or struggling with creating things or dealing with self doubt and fear around this stuff, what would you say?
I would say to make art at all costs.
Mhm.
To create space. That's a big thing for me, is having a space where I can create, having my instruments out or my art stuff out or a space to write. And then creating time, like intentionally creating time, putting it in your schedule as if it's the most important thing. Take a class, go take a class at a community college, take an online class, and then realize like creativity doesn't have to be limited to specific projects. Like can you infuse more creativity in the way you plate your food or the way that you cook or the way that you dress yourself for the day or asking creative questions when in conversation. I think there is a really good book I always like to recommend called Art and Fear. And I recommend that to anyone. Have you read that book?
Yeah, you recommended it to me, and I
Did
read
I recommend it to you?
it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I always recommend to everyone because it really just helps speak to the blocks that we have around creating and almost giving us permission to just do so anyway. And yeah, just know that you are an artist and trust what you're drawn to and your own intuition, and know that if you start now, you have the rest of your life to continue to cultivate that.
Are you ready to share something? Would you like to share something?
Yeah, I'll share. I was going to share a poem.
Oh, great.
Um, this is the last poem of my book, From the Inside of Corners. You can get it on Amazon.
Oh,
I will make a disclaimer that this poem is cute and happy and light, and but I will make a disclaimer that this book is not cute or happy or light. There's a lot of grief and heartbreak in this book, and a lot of a lot of joy as well. But this book really was a big process of grief and loss. But the last poem, and it's a part of a three-part. That's actually a children's book that I'm gonna hopefully put out this year, the Moon series. But this is the last one, so I'll read it and share it. The Moon, Part 3. Great poets write about the beauty of the moon. In her light they bask, and in her glow they swoon. There's a draw in knowing she's a light they'll never catch, preserved up in the sky, a timeless egg to never hatch. But the moon told me a secret. She whispered in my ear. She said, I know a greater light than mine. I listened in to hear. She said, as you gaze upon me, I am gazing back with ease. And the light I see in you would bring you to your knees. You look at me with wonder, but yourself you cannot see. For the shine in you is grander than I could ever be. So please continue staring up and gaze towards me true, so I can look upon my favorite light, the one I see in you. So when you gaze into the sky and marvel at the moon, when you sit in evening silence listening for her tune, know that she's been waiting, been yearning for her favorite sight. She's peering down to see your eyes, two stars lighting up her night.
it's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. From the Inside of Corners, tell me the title. What's that?
So, From the Inside of Corners is the name of one of the poems in the
Okay.
book. It's towards the end, and it really talks about kind of corners as a metaphor for safe places to hide in, and how, making yourself small sometimes feels like something you have to overcome, but really, I learned to make myself small to keep myself safe. But from a small vantage point is where I learned to really pay attention to detail, and where I learned to weave metaphor and meaning into all the experiences I've had. And so it's this metaphor for me being inside the inside of a corner, like a safe space where I've collected treasures and memories and paid attention and kind of lost in my own. I used to take this, I used to get so upset. My mom would say this all the time is, oh, there's Taran like lost in her own little world, or oh, you're always lost in your own little world. And now I also understand that it's like dissociating, which, is something I've had to work on. But really, it's taking some of the harder pieces we've been given in life, but learning how to turn them into something beautiful. And so, yeah, corners being a metaphor for spaces that I've learned to create safety and security, and also make art out of.
From the Inside of Corners by Taran Ailey. She also has two incredible, incredible records, Letting Go and For Her. So check those out. Taran, thank you so much for joining me and talking about
Yeah,
this topic, which I think is super important. I think it's important for everybody to understand their own artist.
absolutely.
Just
It's vital.
yeah. Create.
Great. Make art, make weird art.
Yeah, just be weird. Just be
Just be weird, just get freaky.
weird.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you, Taran. Where can they check you out? Where can they look you up?
I do have a website, taranailey.com, where I have all of my offerings. I also have some upcoming courses and classes, like supporting people with their creative expression, and then social media, Instagram at Taran it up, Taran it underscore UP. And yeah, that's kind of the best places to find me in my work.
Well, thank you, Taran. Appreciate your time.
I know that you've
You're
heard me say
welcome.
many
Thanks for having
times, or
me.
read or listened on the tapes that